Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. I have a very unique show today, a very fascinating show. You know, I've been waiting to have our guest on the show for a number of weeks. She's really a leader in the field of bioceuticals and nutraceuticals. I mean, when it comes to understanding how to bring something to market and really change the dynamic of what happens to the different clientele that use the products, I mean, nobody knows it better than Miss Christina DiArcangelo. And she is the CEO of Affinity Biopartners. And if I was to spend the full 30 minutes of our show today talking about all of her background, all of her experience, all of her accolades, all the drugs and products she's brought to market, well, we'll be here for the full 30 minutes. So I thought just instead we should just do the interview, pull the lens back to 30,000 feet to start with Christina. And then we have so many questions for you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so very much for having me here today, Andy. I'm so excited and I'm honored that you all selected me to be part of your show, and especially as an entrepreneur spotlight, because that's really what I am, as a true entrepreneur.
I love it. You've got the necklace that says DiArc, of course, great grandeur as well. You're a leader. I mean, when people talk about bioceuticals, they talk about nutraceuticals. I mean, you're at the top of the list as a go-to person to go consult with, to talk to, you know, to help people develop and bring to the finish line different types of products. Let's pull the lens back, though, to 30,000 feet like we always do. Tell us about Affinity Biopartners, and then we're going to get into it.
Sure. Thank you so much. So Affinity Biopartners is a global clinical research organization. So what we usually are hired to do is to operationalize clinical studies, whether it's designing or figuring out how to secure the patient population that they're looking to investigate, because that's really what we're doing. It's an investigation, right? Just like when you file something in the FDA, it's a new drug application. It's being investigated, right? So I think everybody can understand that, because we talk in all these acronyms with our own special vocabulary. So whenever I'm on a show, especially if I'm talking to people that may not understand biotech or pharma or nutraceuticals, I want to make sure that I educate people along the way so they stay up with us, so they really see the impact that we're doing. So we also are responsible a lot of times for figuring out secondary endpoints for disease states. So an example is COVID. Right. I've been working on COVID since 2020 in the traditional space, where I filed my first pre-IND application with the FDA, March 30th of 2020, when there was only 265,000 cases of COVID worldwide. Wow. The landscape has changed tremendously since then. And our understanding of COVID then is completely different than what it is today. So one of my jobs is to try to help find as much data out as possible related to the disease. So if COVID is the primary thing that you're studying, then what do you look at secondarily? Do you look at anxiety? Do you look at PTS perhaps? Do you look at cardiovascular issues? Do you look at lung impairment from a pulmonary standpoint? These are all the things that we bring to the table at Affinity Biopartners.
I love it, Christina, so much. Let's keep going, because some of the entrepreneurs are going to be watching the show and they're probably wondering, you know, what types of companies approach Affinity? What types of companies approach Affinity Biopartners? And what's either the big problem that they have, or what's the questions that they have that you can assist them with?
Okay. Well, there's a lot of different things we do at Affinity Biopartners. We call it ABP because we have Affinity Patient Advocacy, that's part of the Affinity family. That's the advocacy company that I started in 2015. So between the research and then advocating for patients, I'm not trying to sound cocky here, Andy, but I think I have a good understanding of what patients think, feel, and need based on various therapeutic areas, since I had been helping my father first with his cancer, stage 4 liver, lung, and stomach cancers. He imploded. Then I also became a patient in 18. I have two autoimmune diseases, Hashimoto and fibromyalgia. So I have now become a patient as well. So a lot of times pharmaceutical and biotech and nutraceutical companies and device companies come to us. So for example, we just had a client potential come to us last week that has a mammogram that's a handheld type device. And so they need to understand how to fast track their 510 application approval, how the clinical study should look, what clinical trial sites they should use. That's our specialty. That's what we've been doing for years. I mean, working on 25 FDA drugs in my career. I mean, I started off when I was in the sandbox.
Yeah.
You know, I've been in it 23 years now. And so someone took a chance on me and gave me a job, and my first clinical research organization, similarly to what I own today. And, you know, that's where we are.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, we're sorry to hear about your father. It sounds like what you've developed, you've been able to come through it and fight it and battle it every day. When we think about it, one thing that comes across my desk all the time, and for people watching the show, Christina, is this thing about this autoimmune disease sort of space. Mm-hmm. It just seems like there's more autoimmune type diseases than ever before. I don't know why it is. I'm thinking maybe you could sort of share some insight on that. And what's the story with all the autoimmune diseases that people are getting right now?
Well, I have a couple hypotheses about this. One of which I won't say today, only because it could be political suicide. So I'll be quiet without saying something, but you guys can all read between the lines what I'm talking about. But my autoimmune diseases are emotional based autoimmune diseases. So a lot of people don't realize and recognize that what we do to ourselves, you know, I can work out. Like that's what I was doing. As a matter of fact, when I had the Hashi diagnosis, I was working out. I had changed my diet because I kept gaining all this weight. I was fatigued. I was losing, like this is all my real hair today. But at one point, Andy, I had like pieces of hair that were like this big in the back of my head, and I didn't understand why. And I had anxiety. I just didn't know. And once I was able to get the diagnosis, because I pushed the envelope, because I'm a clinical researcher, I was able to ask the right questions and tell them my symptoms, write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I said, listen, I need full blood draw, hormone levels, this, and that. And that's how we figured it out, was because I pushed the envelope. If in fact I hadn't pushed the envelope, we'd be in a completely different place than we're in today. I've lost 150 pounds. Because I had expanded so much and I couldn't lose this weight. I work out 7 days a week. I hit the bag 7 days a week. I'm Krav trained, so I know Krav Maga as well. So I'm a pretty active person, you know, but mine were due to emotional things. And a lot of people think, oh, well, was it because of your father? Because it was 2015 he died? No. I was the victim of domestic violence within my marriage. And so I hid that. So here I am, this top performer in my career, but silently inside I was dying, so to speak, with all the stuff that was going on externally in my marriage and raising a son together with this person. And that was very, very, very challenging. And it made me sick. It literally made me sick. And a lot of times you'll notice that if you have one autoimmune disease, you then get diagnosed with other ones because you already were predisposed and something happened in your body that caused this and triggered it. And that's what we're seeing out there, right, Andy, in the space, you know, out there right now. Autoimmune diseases are popping up left and right. My nephew, he's 23. He has rheumatoid arthritis, and that is a hereditary autoimmune that my grandmother had on my mother's side. So some of it has to do with genetics, and some of it has to do with your environment and what you're exposed to.
Wow. so interesting when we think about sort of the mind, spirit, body connection with the autoimmune diseases and what's happening. Like you mentioned, some of it can be hereditary, but some of it can be sort of the emotional or spiritual space that you're in that sort of connects to the body. Maybe it triggers something within the gene pool or the hereditary chromosomes. You're the expert on that, but it just sounds like, a lot of it can be connected to the mind and the spirit. When, as a clinical researcher, Christina, when we look at what you're doing, of course, at Affinity BioPartners, do you come at it from the perspective that some of the things you're researching, some of the things you're looking at might indeed be connected to this mind spirit sort of tunnel that you're talking about with regard to sort of the outcomes with regard to the clinical research you're doing?
Yes, that's, you know what, Andy, we didn't rehearse this just for our viewers that are going to be watching this, but this plays really well into Spectral Analytics telemonitoring because, so I have an Apple iWatch on today. I wear it all the time. And it's not because I like to have an Apple Watch. I want to connect to my phone. No, none of that. It's for the biometric capabilities because I'm a researcher at heart, right? So like I talked to you about earlier, I look at secondary endpoints when I'm looking at different disease states. Some of those secondary endpoints can be picked up from biometrics. So with the telemonitoring system that we built last year, that's live today that we're using, we have been able to effectively program the Garmin and the Apple Watch into our telemonitoring platform. Why is this important? Because when patients are under duress, their cortisol levels go up, right? Their heart rate starts to go up, their blood pressure goes up, oxygen changes. That can all be captured on your watch. So can you imagine as a patient being hooked into this free system that you get to use, that your doctor's attached to, because we're not in the business of being doctors here at Spectral. We're in the business of monitoring patients and collecting data so we can treat you where you are with your condition, rather than saying, take this, take that, this, that, exercise, try this diet. I mean, listen, I've tried everything, okay, with my autoimmune diseases.
Wow. So let's talk about the Apple Watch. You're wearing it right now. How does someone get hooked in, if you will, for lack of a better term, to the system? How do they go about that?
Yeah, so this is really awesome. I just was watching the demo today with my tech team. Now, I'm not a programmer. Okay, that is not if you look at my CV, my LinkedIn, anything about me, please be sure that I am not a programmer. So I have a whole tech team. They're global, all over the world, Canada, New York, Virginia, India. I mean, we're a global team that we have. And I watched the demo today so what will happen is if patients want to access Spectral telemonitoring, we are going to release a link on our website for Affinity Patient Advocacy. We haven't released it yet, but we will be. Any of our patients that come in through APA, that's a free nonprofit company. We advocate for people all day, every day for free. Because you're paying enough in healthcare costs. We depend on fundraising dollars to succeed, right? And my for-profit company kicks some money sometimes over there for expenses. But what will happen is you'll click on that link and you'll register in. It'll connect you to Spectral telemonitoring. And then you're almost randomized like you are in a clinical study. Because of HIPAA, we have HIPAA provisional set up. I don't know it's Andy Jacob or Christina DiArcangelo in the system. We use your initials and we give you a number, right? When you sign up. Your consent, you consent as well. So you'll have a consent just like you would if you were in a clinical study. All this see how it all kind of plays into this. And then your consent gets filed. We don't see it. I don't see it at Spectral. You are, your first, middle initial, last name, and then number. We'll just say 001. So I see you then coming in through APA, the nonprofit, You're randomized into our system, and then you literally you fill out your stuff in the patient portal, and there's a very easy button that you click that says to access your watch. We are also developing a low-cost watch for patients because not everybody can afford a Garmin. Not everybody can afford an Apple. Our point, which is different than many in this space, is to keep things low cost for them. So they will get a watch through APA at no cost because it's my nonprofit. So we pick it up. And then they register, they'll get one of our watches, they register it, and then we can see everything that's going on with the patient. And we have artificial intelligence bots that fire messages to your watch that tells you to take a breath. Are you okay? Have you eaten? What's going on with your noise? It seems a little loud where you are. Can you reduce the sound? Those are the things that we're working on.
Wow, it's so powerful and technologically advanced, and you're using AI. One thing that comes to mind when I listen to you, Christina, is, you've got this great background as, a researcher and a patient advocate, and of course, a clinical researcher as well. But there's something that sort of rides above that when I kind of listen to you and we look at your background, and it's really caring about people. While the technology drives everything and the AI drives everything, and of course, Affinity Biopartners, there's these big names. It's a nutraceutical, company focused on research and development and bioceuticals. The one thing that overlays it, that's very apparent, is this caring attitude that you and your people have about other people. So where did that come from? As a research scientist, as a clinical researcher, that you put people's health first above and beyond the technology?
Well, it goes back to my dad. Everything I do goes back to my dad. He was a blue collar guy. He first was president of a local steel company's union called Phoenix Steel. And he was, working in a steel mill and working really, really hard. And the steel mill went through 3 bankruptcies. He exposed me to this because he wanted to teach me about legal things, because at that time I wanted to go to school to be a paralegal, which I did, and then eventually law school thereafter. And so I got that kind of exposure very young, with my dad, going to the union hall, seeing him fight for people, their rights, making sure grievances were filed to protect them so they weren't unjustly fired, making sure they had proper health care insurance, making sure their copays weren't high, making sure their pensions were taken care of. And then from there, when the steel mill finally closed, he became a Pennsylvania Turnpike worker and became a Teamster. And that's why the Teamsters work with my companies now, which is odd, right? Because the Teamsters talk about pharma pricing and all these things. Why would they want to work with someone like me when I am living and breathing pharmaceuticals my whole career, pretty much, right? And it's because of my integrity base, because I do care about patients, because I fight for people. I fight for people that lose their jobs unjustly because of their medical conditions, because of the background I have from my father. So before my son, everything was for my father. I wanted to make him proud. I took the nickname DiArc. That was his nickname. And in the Italian culture, usually the boy takes precedence over the girl, but I was the oldest and I was the most like him. And so I adopted DiArc as my nickname, and that's what everybody calls me in the industry is DiArc. For years and years and years, everybody knows me as DiArc. But also my last name means the archangel. And I don't mean to get religious or anything like that. But I take what I do very seriously because I want to comfort people and help them feel better. And so my name is representative of who I am inside, which is not just this corporate leader that's been crushing it. I do everything I do for people.
I love it. I mean, it's such a remarkable journey. Such a remarkable story. Everybody knows you as DiArc. I love that so much. That's like Prince, and the revolution. God rest his soul. When we think about it, though, there's something that I was thinking about prior to having you on the show, and I wanted to make sure I got to this part because I hear it all too often where people have a medical condition or a medical diagnosis that's either they can't figure out what it is, they can't figure out the root of it, or they don't even know what it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, how do we solve this problem with so many people walking around with these challenges that the scientists can't even figure out what's going on with them?
Well, that's one of the reasons. I'm not trying to be salesy here or anything, but that's one of the reasons why we built the telemonitoring, was so that we could actually see what was going on with these patients. And that way we could help the doctors become more customizable. An example that is like real that happened to me 2 months ago was I was running a clinical study in Pittsburgh. The patient that came in for pre-screening, he had come in with symptoms of a heart attack or potentially COVID. So thankfully, the clinical trial coordinator is very, very, very intelligent. She knew not to consent the patient. She was listening and paying attention. She asked him to go and get a COVID test, because they don't do COVID tests at this clinic because they're not a general practice place. They do wound care, hyperbaric, all kinds of clinical studies, but they don't do general, and this study, we didn't stack in COVID-19 tests. It wasn't a requirement to be in the study because it's not a COVID study. So anyway, it turns out that this patient was having a heart attack. If in fact he had been hooked up to Spectral, the doctor would have received a notification through the telemonitoring that said AJJ002 is having a potential cardiac arrhythmia. Please contact patient. Now nobody's monitoring you, right? So all these long hauler COVID people, and I help a lot of them with APA, honestly, there's a lot, I've been helping a lot of them, and they're coming to me with all these different autoimmune diseases, all these different cardiac issues. My sister had COVID-19 and Delta 8, both, and she has cardiac arrhythmia now. So I bought her the Apple iWatch because she can't afford it. So I was, I'm her sissy, I'm her big sister. I bought her this watch, and now she will be hooked into our telemonitoring, and I will get her alerts because I will be paying attention to her. But your doctor will be responsible for you once you're inside. They will see everything because patients aren't good about communicating because a lot of times they don't know there's anything wrong with them.
Yeah, it's such an amazing health management service you provide. Of course, you're so into wellness and social services as well. Before we go into entrepreneurship, because I have a couple questions about that for you, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I mean, you've sliced out a certain amount of time, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens with your team, because you're known for building a great team. You're known for putting together the best of the best. How do you keep sort of the corporate mindset with your entire team, that it's all about the patient, all about doing good, all about providing something that's world-class, all about continually looking out for the end client, the end user, and building that type of a company? How do you do it from a leadership perspective?
Well, one of the things I do is I share feedback directly that I receive from the patients. I ask them, is it okay if I share this with my team? Because there's that HIPAA, that I keep everything confidential unless somebody tells me otherwise. So they receive firsthand many of these emails. I mean, we've had patients that were suicidal, Andy, like COVID-19 long haulers that were suicidal because no one understands them. Doctors don't understand what to do. They're trying their best. They're trying, but nobody knows enough about this stuff. And these poor patients are frustrated and they feel lonely. They feel alone. And so we've helped a lot of them get off of the suicide pathway that they were on. And one of them was one of the guys that worked under my father. So you can imagine, I knew him, before this all happened. So I was like, oh my God, it was like a family member, And so I give them 360 feedback constantly from the patients. I also include them in a lot of the things that I'm doing so that they can learn from me these things, because listen, I've got a plan for success. I've got a plan for, I can't be everywhere all the time. I depend on my team, and I appreciate them, and I take all the good attributes that they have, and I make sure that we expose that they work on things that they feel passionate about. Because if they're not passionate, there's nothing there for them. It's like drinking a crappy drink or something. Like, forget it.
Yeah, that's great advice, especially for the entrepreneurs watching the show. I mean, rewind what Christina just said. When you bring in your team and you let them see the success stories and share with them the positive results and share with them some client testimonials or real stories from real people that are gaining a benefit from whatever your product or service is, that makes the team more sticky. That makes them want to pull together even stronger, become even a better team. Love it. I mean, that's like a Harvard MBA you just gave everybody.
Thank you so much.
I love that. Let's talk about entrepreneurship, because, you're a great entrepreneur. We have younger entrepreneurs watching the show. Sometimes they hit a roadblock, or they hit a pothole in the road, or they hit a wall, they freeze in the frame. What can you share with the younger entrepreneurs, Christina, based on your journey as an entrepreneur, that you can give them some feedback and some positive thoughts to kind of get through those potholes that they're experiencing in their business?
Oh, sure. I mean, we still hit potholes. And I've been doing all this stuff for how many years, but I branch out into new things constantly, like my brand, and I have like swag and stuff. And, like I formulated the candles myself in the aromatherapy. Like I put thought behind it because of the effect I wanted. I mean, what the hell do I know about formulating candles? But I figured it out. But here's the real truth of the matter, is that you can't give up, okay? I'm from the city of brotherly love, okay? Rocky's like, that's my homie, okay? And I have paintings in my house, and I sometimes quote him, Rocky Balboa. But the thing is that you have to keep getting up, and you have to remember what you're intended here to do on this planet. And it's not getting spiritual. You're here for a reason. Everybody is here for a reason, I believe personally. That's my opinion. But you're here to do something great. And with every greatness, there's always a fall. And there's lots of lessons to learn. So I always say, all those lessons you put in your toolbox, okay? A lot of people think they put the toolbox in the back seat. Oh no. And they're driving. Oh no. It needs to be in the passenger seat with the seatbelt on, so it doesn't slide over and fall into the ground and your pieces are everywhere. You put it right here next to you. And you remember all these things you're learning along the way. And sometimes, I personally believe this, that sometimes things happen on purpose, so that because it wasn't meant for you then, because something bigger was meant for you later. So you can't put yourself down and do that subconscious talking to yourself, like, oh man, I was a goofball with that, or whatever you say to yourself. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't put that in your subconscious, because you'll remember that. You remember that you're great and you're learning something new. And just like when we were kids learning how to ride a bike, and eventually we took our training wheels off and we were zipping down the lane, that's where you're going to get.
I love it. There's an old saying, thank God for unanswered prayers. And of course, like I know as fellow entrepreneurs, that if you're not hitting those potholes once in a while, you're not pushing hard enough. And I think that's right. What you're saying. Well, I love the analogy of take the toolbox and put it in the front seat with a seatbelt on. I can see that being a chapter in your next book you're going to write. I love this, Christina. This has been such a great interview, and a clinical researcher extraordinaire. Everybody calls you, DiArc in the industry. Your nutraceutical company is amazing. Of course, bioceuticals is right up your alley. You're knocking the cover off the ball. I love this Spectral telemonitoring as well. I mean, you're going to change so many lives with that, and you're doing such great with your nonprofit as well. So, wow, Christina, thank you so much for cutting out some time, coming on the .com magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight series today. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun. Like the whole time I was smiling, like my jaw is going to hurt and my cheeks. Thank you so much, Andy. This was so much fun.